Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 28, 3. Clunk. The carriage started to move. An Hong glanced over and Cage and Taylor, who were sitting across from them, and stuck closely to Cale. Young Master Cale, do you know anything about this royal event? Cale looked toward Taylor. Taylor was fine compared to the priestess, who was struggling with her hangover. In fact, he was even better off than Cale. This weak-looking noble had the strongest alcohol tolerance out of the three of them. Cale started to respond to Taylor, who was looking at him. This is my first time going to the palace. I have only been to a northeastern nobles meeting a few years ago. Taylor did not bring this up just to start a conversation. It was because he wanted to share a piece of information with Cale for his generosity. I see. The event this time is to celebrate the 50th birthday of His Royal Highness, our current king. It is an entertaining festival for the citizens. Seeing Cale speak as if it did not include himself, Taylor started to get curious. Sounds like it is not a festival for young Master Cale. How can it be a festival I'd enjoy when my heart is going crazy thinking about the terror incident? Cale did not say that out loud. He was probably the only person who knew about the secret organization and the upcoming terror incident. Knowing about such a fact was bound to bring a heavy sense of responsibility and headache. Of course, there was a relationship between that sense of responsibility and the headache. I will prevent it, but I will step aside if it seems like I will get hurt or tired. That was Cale's point of view on the terror incident. Do just enough so that I will not be inconvenienced. However, someone like Cale, no, Kim Rok-soo, who had a fear of death, could not just pretend that he did not know anything. It's not a festival for you either, young Master Taylor. Taylor, as well as Cage, who had been frowning because of her hangover, started to smile after hearing Cale's words. I am considering it to be my last obstacle before I can celebrate. Compared to his gentle appearance, Taylor was a risk-taker. That was how he was able to be in front of Vanyan, even with his ethical personality, before he was attacked. Be careful of His Highness, the Crown Prince. Taylor gazed toward Cale and continued to speak. Although I may have been pushed aside, I still have ways of getting information in the Marquis' estate. Although this 50-year birthday celebration for the king was planned from the beginning, the act of calling all of the nobles together was something that the Crown Prince suggested. Taylor knew some information about the Crown Prince. I'm not sure how I should describe the Crown Prince to you. Seeing Taylor struggling, Cale casually answered. He is someone with a glib tongue. Ah, yes. Heir, I mean. Taylor, who agreed with Cale, quickly turned pale and tried to take it back, but, in the end, was forced to admit that it was true. Yes. You are right. You already know about it? Isn't it information anybody who is interested can find out? Of course. But this is the first time I've heard anyone be so blunt about it like you, young Master Cale. Seeing Taylor nodding his head, Cale started to think about the Crown Prince. The glib tongue of the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was very good at giving compliments to people. He was also very good at praising these people in public for their deeds and giving them recognition. After that, he used these people. Of course, the people being used have no idea that they are being used. One of these victims in the novel was none other than Choi Han, the person the Crown Prince lifts up as his close friend and hero. For a commoner like Choi Han, he thought it was good that someone like the Crown Prince treated him so closely. However, for Cale, or Kim Rok-soo, who was reading the novel, the Crown Prince was the type of person he hated the most. The problem is, that the way he uses people for the right reasons. He did not use people for his own benefits or for power. He used these people for the kingdom, the citizens, and to make the nation greater. I guess it is too much to call it using people. Rather than using, it was more like asking for their help. The crown prince did not order these people using his superiority, but instead he asked them on an equal level. He used that glib tongue of his to praise them a lot and then give a really sad reason that people could not turn down. Naturally, Choi Han was unable to say no. The cold, yet just as good-natured Rosalind ended up agreeing to help out in the end as well. Of course, even such a person had a weakness. Anyways, young Master Cale, His Highness the Crown Prince, ahem, as you already know, it is tiring to get involved with such a person. You do not have to worry. I plan on being as quiet as possible before returning home. I do not like being flashy. Cale answered back like it was nothing. However, he then realized that silence had filled the room after he responded. The kittens, An and Hong, Cage, who was struggling with her hangover, and even Taylor, who had a gentle smile on his face. They were all staring at Cale. Why are you looking at me like that? Will it really be possible to? No, never mind. Both Cage and Taylor said no before looking away. The kittens just shook their heads. Cale started to frown and added on. Even if I do end up being dragged in, the thing that young Master Taylor and Priestess Nim are thinking about will not happen. Taylor and Cage could see that Cale was smiling. His smile was so devious that he looked like a villain. Cale smiled at the two of them before continuing on. I also have a very glib tongue. The Crown Prince tended to stay away from people similar to himself. It was his wariness of others like him. If the Crown Prince was the type to praise people and use them for his needs, Cale just needed to act the same way. Seeing Cage look toward him with an expression that seemed to say she was feeling better, he looked right into her eyes. She then started to speak. I think this look suits you very well, young Master Cale. You look very evil. It is better than looking like a good person. I knew it. Cage nodded her head and seemed to confirm something, but Cale did not care. Instead, he pushed aside the curtain on the window and looked outside. They were pretty close to the gate of the capital now. The gate that Cale's carriage was heading toward was a different gate than the gate that the commoners used. He was heading toward the noble's entrance, which would allow him to get through it much faster. The capital really is different. That was what came out of Cale's mouth based on what Cale saw out through the window. Taylor seemed to understand why Cale felt that way, and nodded his head. Roan Kingdom is the kingdom of boulders. Cale could see the large wall surrounding the capital. There were many different sculptures on the wall. The Roan Kingdom was kind of unique. Not only was it the western continent's greatest source of marble, but the northwest and western areas of Roan Kingdom contained a lot of granite. That was why it was called the Land of Boulders. If you traveled up north, the majority of the mountain peaks were made of granite. The Roan Kingdom had quite a lot of rock mountains. Taylor continued to speak, as if he suddenly remembered something. If you look through the ancient stories, there are many, boulder-related stories, even before the Roan Kingdom came into existence. One of them says that this land had a boulder-like guardian. The Roan Kingdom was located on the northeast of the western continent. It was a guardian that could protect everything from any kind of attack. When darkness descended on the continent, this guardian was the one to stand in the front against it. There were many different myths about the end of the ancient times. You would hear tons of different stories as you traveled around the continent. Some say that the end of the ancient times came when darkness descended and some heroes managed to defeat this darkness, others say it ended because people were jealous of each other's powers and fought for control. Finally, some even say that a god was so angry that it destroyed all living beings. The story that Taylor was discussing right now was one of those many myths. Taylor, you seem to like that story. Taylor nodded his head at Cage's question. Yes. I do. Cale turned to look at Taylor. Taylor had always had a fragile body, even before his legs became paralyzed. Taylor patted his knees and continued to speak. The guardian is said to have stood firmly in place, like a boulder, even after everything in his body became broken. That was how he was able to protect the people and the land of this northeastern area, that is covered in boulders. There were a lot of different contents in the stories regarding the darkness that descended onto the continent. When the darkness appeared at the center of the continent, other myths discussed the tales of those heroes that fought against it. However, the main character in the one Taylor is talking about only focused on protecting. Taylor considered such an individual to be a hero. Such an existence cannot survive in the present day. That is why I like this myth so much. But you don't seem to believe it? It is very rare to see someone injure himself so severely to protect something. I agree. Cale nodded his head to agree with Taylor's statement. It was one thing to protect yourself, but this guardian protected others and this northeastern land? Cale could not understand such logic. But this is my first time hearing about this specific story. Cale had read about all sorts of legends and myths regarding ancient powers while reading until Volume 5 of The Birth of a Hero. However, this was the first time he heard about the Boulder Guardian of Roan Kingdom. It is probably because it is not that popular. I only found it while researching through ancient texts for information about ancient powers. I told Cage about it as well. Cale nodded his head again, and lowered the curtains once more. He then took out a round pendant from his pocket and threw it toward Taylor. Taylor and Cage both nodded their heads and held each other's hand with the pendant in the middle of both of their hands. The magic device started to operate. Cale let out a sigh and grabbed a bottle from a corner of the carriage. A moment later, the carriage stopped outside the noble's gate, and Cale could hear the vice-captain's voice as well as someone else's voice. "Young master, the capital's guard wishes to verify the occupants." Bang! Cale's foot kicked the carriage door open. He could see the vice-captain's relaxed expression, as well as the anxious capital guard. Cale had a bottle in one hand and a glass full of alcohol in the other, and looked toward the capital guard. "Go ahead." The inside of the carriage was full of the smell of alcohol. Cale's extremely flushed face and the stench made it very clear that he had been drinking since last night. Although the festival was still a week away, many nobles had already passed through this entrance. Two of the capital guards looked inside the carriage every time to do a cursory look. However, the guard had never seen such a sight before. The vice-captain smiled gently at the guard, and started to speak. "Our young master cures his hangovers through drinking more alcohol. He is someone who has reached the apex of overcoming a hangover." Cale looked at the anxious guard and the vice-captain who was trying to praise him as best as possible, and started to think. This is tiring. That was why he said the following. "Can't you hurry up?" The guard called over the other guard to look through the carriage, that was full of empty alcohol bottles, and gave the approval. "Everything looks fine." The vice-captain slowly closed the door while the guard welcomed Cale. "Welcome to the capital." Creak. Click. The door closed completely and the carriage made its way through the gate. Cale pushed forward the full glass in his hand and started to speak. "Apparently, welcome to the capital." Taylor, who was no longer invisible, started to laugh as he handed Cale the pendant and received the glass. "It has been a while since I've been welcomed." Cale's group had arrived at the capital. Chapter 29, U4. Cale's carriage leisurely headed to the south of the capital. Whis, the capital of the Roan Kingdom. People were clearly busy getting ready for the upcoming birthday celebration. Cale looked out through the slightly lifted curtain and started to think. Choi Han should arrive in about 3 days. Unless he moves like a crazy lunatic, Choi Han should arrive 3 days later. He will bring Rosalind and Locke with him, and they will run into the secret organization while getting Locke, which will delay them even more. In the novel, Choi Han ran into Locke, the only survivor of the Blue Wolf tribe and someone with the Wolf King's bloodline, before running into the secret organization once again. After that, Choi Han would run into the secret organization once more at the Capital Terror incident. Harris Village, Choi Han's first residence outside the Forest of Darkness. This secret organization was the one that had murdered everyone in the village. He had run into the organization twice, but he did not have much information on them. The assassins don't have stars on their clothes. Since assassination was the goal for both Harris Village and the Blue Wolf tribe, the secret organization sent their assassin squad. The assassin squad only wears black clothes without the stars, just in case something goes wrong. They were people who chose to take their own lives if they were caught. But things will change starting at the capital. That blood-loving punk will show up. While preventing the terror incident with Rosalind, Choi Han comes in contact with a leader of the secret organization. That leader and their subordinates all have the red star and 5 white stars on their chest. Cale had already come up with an excuse to give Choi Han as well for their uniforms when they rescued the dragon. He just blankly stared outside, before shutting the curtains once again. The happy citizens decorating the streets, and the streets that were becoming very beautiful. All of this would turn into a place of despair in a week. Young Master Taylor. They were now at the southern part of Hwis, at the location of the noble residences. Cale's carriage stopped in front of a building, and Cale stood up and got ready to exit. Ron will take care of you once we arrive at the residence. You just need to head out that way. He was looking at the door as he continued. Forget everything. He could hear Taylor and Cage's voice coming from behind him. Thank you very much. See you in a joyful environment next time. Cale started to smile. Cage and Taylor continued to look at him, but neither Cale, nor the 2 kittens, paid the 2 people any attention. The carriage door opened. Young Master, we have arrived. Cale, Hans, and the kittens could all see Taylor and Cage, but did not look at them. They just acted like the 2 of them weren't there, and got off the carriage. Cale instantly turned toward the driver's seat once he got off the carriage. Ron had a benign smile on his face and nodded his head. Ron, who heard the situation from Deputy Butler Hans, would take care of the rest. Ron headed with the driver to park the carriage. Cale did not pay any more attention to the carriage, and turned around. He then let out a gasp of admiration. The kittens, An and Hong, seemed to be surprised as well, as their golden pupils were extremely dilated. It's even better than I expected. The Count really was wealthy. Past the large iron gate was a 5-story residence. There was even a garden between the gate and the building itself. It was not fancy or shiny, but it definitely looked more expensive than the nearby noble residences. It had the aura and look of a building that definitely took a large amount of money to build. At the center of it was, naturally, a sculpture with the Henituse family's golden turtle on it. Skreek. Bang. The large gate with the golden turtle crest on it slowly opened. The guard opening the gate, as well as the butler of the residence and the servants, all lined up to greet Cale. Young Master Cale Henituse. Welcome to the capital. It was an extremely respectful greeting. They were bowing their heads so low that their heads looked like it would reach the ground. The old man who seemed to be in charge was speaking so loudly it looked like he might hurt his vocal cords. We will do our very best to serve you. Why is he like this? Cale looked toward Hans, who was pretending that he had no idea what was going on. He definitely knows what is going on. Hans definitely knew the reason they were acting this way. Cale found it annoying to ask, and approached the old man in charge and helped him up. He then looked toward the rest of the servants and started to speak. Everybody, lift your heads up. The servants quickly raised their heads. They had never seen Cale while working at the residence. However, they had definitely heard stories about Cale from the people that visited from the Henituse territory. The trash, Cale. The servants here heard that Cale considered people who worked in the estate as either nobles or useless people. Sometimes, he didn't even treat them like people. They were anxious about what Cale was going to say next and waited for him to continue. No need to be this respectful in the future. I do not like to cause any issues to people who do their job well. The servants' gazes all turned toward Cale. Cale could see that they were all still stiff and started to frown. I heard that mother picked all of you. She said you all have a lot of pride for your work, so I'm sure you will perform very well. The servants' expressions all turned odd. Ask Hans if you have any questions. He had enough to do as is, so it was better to leave everything to Hans. Plus, there was no reason to pay a lot of attention when he was leaving again in just a few days. Cale looked toward the servants, whose expressions were getting slightly better, and started to walk. Cale walked in front as they headed to the 5-story building. When a homeowner enters their house for the first time, they needed to personally walk from the gate to the door of the residence. This symbolized that this was his territory. When the crown prince became the king, the crown prince, no, the king, walked from the castle gate to the center of the palace, where his throne was located. It was a similar kind of logic. Count de Ruth and the countess had walked into this residence like this before, but Cale was now the owner of this large residence. Skreek. The large iron gate with the golden turtle closed. At the same time, as it usually is with information in the capital, the nearby nobles all learned of the arrival of the Henituse family's representative. This happened even faster than the person Cale sent to the palace to inform the crown of his arrival could reach the palace. That was why these 3 people, who were members of the northeastern nobles gathering, started to worry. They started to frown while drinking tea with each other. Sigh, it really is not young Master Basin but young Master Cale. This is going to make things complicated. But we need to carry him with us, since he is one of our own. That is true. I'm sure even a trash will not act up in front of us, right? The neutral Henituse family and the nice, but not flexible, Basin. Then, there was the trash of the Henituse family, Cale. These 3, whose families were close to the Henituse family among all of the northeastern noble families, decided to make the decision that made sense for their future. We just need to protect him and prevent him from doing anything stupid. Let's first meet with him and talk. To them, Cale was like a toddler walking by the water that needed their protection. At the same time, Cale was dangerous and could cause a scene at any point. They immediately sent an invitation letter to Cale's residence, which was quickly delivered into Cale's hand by that evening. Cale threw the letter to the table with an extremely annoyed expression. Will you not go? Can I not go? No. It is a northeastern nobles meeting. I knew it. Nobles were really fast at getting information. Cale was the same way as well. Hans handed the document he received from the residence manager to Cale. This is the list of nobles who are currently in the capital. Good. Did Ron take care of things properly? Hans had a short response to Cale's question. Cale was satisfied with that answer. Cale had prepared a lot for Taylor. A wig, a robe, a wheelchair without the Stan family crest, and even money. He had given everything to Taylor properly. Well, other than the money, Hans handled the delivery process for everything else. Good work. Get some rest. Yes, sir. I will make sure to get some rest. Hans was not the type to say that he was okay when told to rest. Cale said one more thing, as Hans quickly tried to leave. Ah, but have them send something up for me to eat? I will make sure to do so. Hans quickly responded to Cale's statement, that indicated he would not be going down to the dining room, and soon enough, Cale's chamber was filled with a feast. Cale looked at the dishes that included meat, desserts, and even wine, and smiled with satisfaction before heading over to the terrace. His chamber was located on the 3rd floor. It was the room that received the most sunlight. He opened the large window heading to the terrace and called out. He then left the window open and sat down next to the table. Soon enough, Cale could see a couple leaves floating in the sky and sitting down on the chair across from Cale. The dragon had entered the room with a couple of leaves stuck to him. An and Hong also sat down on chairs to the left and right of the invisible dragon. Cale stared at the three of them, before opening the wine bottle and telling them to eat. Go ahead and eat. The red wine filled the glass. You gathered ingredients for us, but you never got to eat any of it. Cale brought the wine glass to his lips as he continued to speak. I'm sure it wasn't easy following us. At that moment, the black dragon removed its invisibility magic and revealed itself. An helped remove the leaves that were stuck to the dragon, while Hong stuffed a piece of steak that B. Crocs had cooked into the dragon's mouth. The average age of these three animals was 7 years old. Cale just watched the three animals eat, before pushing more food toward them. Seeing Cale being so nice made An and Hong flinch, while the black dragon stopped chewing and just started to observe Cale. Cale took another sip as he started to think. They're going to be working very hard in the future. Since they will need to work on his behalf, the least he could do was feed them well. Maybe it was because they were all so young, but Cale was able to relax for the first time in a long time, even around stronger than average individuals. It would be great if it could just stay like this. A house about this size, delicious food like this, and time to relax. Cale was thinking about how great it would be to live a life with those three things. His goal was to live like this once Basin became the official successor. Cale made up his mind once more. He then turned on the magic music box in the corner. A song that he was not familiar with started playing as Cale took another sip of wine. He could see the sky starting to get darker. This is great. Now this is living. Cale had a relaxed smile on his face. At that moment, the black dragon immediately turned invisible again, while the kittens started to pretend to be normal kittens by washing their faces. Cale got up to head to the door. Clang! He accidentally hit the wine bottle while getting up, and it fell down and broke into pieces. The carpet started to get stained with the red wine. I have a bad feeling about this. Cale suddenly had a bad feeling for no reason. He quickly headed for the door. Why do I have such an ominous feeling? Cale could not figure it out. Is it Choi Han? No, it can't be. Unless he travels like a lunatic, there is no way he arrived here already. He won't be here for another 3 days. There was no way someone like Choi Han would force an injured lock to move faster. Even though Choi Han had potions that Cale had given him, the wolf tribe was disowned by the gods. Since potions were made with divine power, it did not work on them. And there was also no way that Rosalind, the careful and cautious person who hid her magic abilities at first in the novel, would use advanced magic to transport them all to the capital. But, most importantly, Cale had told Choi Han that he would be staying at a specific hotel in the capital. He was going to go meet Choi Han there once before leaving Ron and B. Crocs to take care of the rest. Right. This ominous feeling is just a side effect of hanging around people like Ron or Choi Han for too long. Cale calmed himself down before vigorously opening the door. Cale's heart sunk as soon as he opened the door. An urgent and desperate voice quickly reached Cale's ear. Cale Nim. I'm sorry. You were the only person that came to mind. A desperate Choi Han was standing in front of him. He seemed to have rushed here as quickly as possible, as he looked like a total mess. Cale felt like he had seen the scariest thing in his life. Next to Choi Han was the deputy butler Hans, who had a similar expression as Choi Han, but with a bit of confusion mixed into it. However, the moment Cale saw the person who came with Choi Han, as well as the person on Choi Han's back, he quickly opened the door. Come in for now. The person on Choi Han's back was none other than the Wolf Tribe member, Locke. Bring him with you. Locke of the Blue Wolf Tribe, the successor of the Wolf King, seemed to be in a dangerous state. Locke was currently going through the pain before transforming into berserk mode for the first time in his life. Cale did not know why the state that happened a year later in the novel was already happening. However, he looked around at everybody and said just one thing. Don't worry. Once something like this. Chapter 30, 5. Choi Han and Locke. Behind Choi Han was Rosalind. These three people walked into Cale's room. Hans. Go bring something to drink. Excuse me? Ah, right away. Cale closed the door without letting Deputy Butler Hans into the room. Cale then pointed to the bed for Choi Han, who was looking at him, to put Locke down. Lay him down first. Choi Han carefully put Locke on the bed. Cale slowly approached Locke. Locke definitely had the purest of pure blood, making him look like a weak human. However, he was pretty tall for being a young boy. Hey-ah, hey-ay-ay-ay, hey-ah. Locke was huffing and trying his best to open his eyes. He had a deep frown on his face, and his body was limp, like he could not put any strength into it. It was already too late to prevent the berserk state from arriving. Cale looked at the tall, but still young boy in front of him, who was doing his best to keep his eyes open, and told him to relax. Just keep your eyes closed. No need to strain yourself. There was no strength in Cale's stern tone, but it had a way of making people listen. Locke slowly closed his eyes. The voice of this man, whom Locke did not know, flowed into Locke's ear. Everything will be okay. Locke was huffing and quietly calling for someone. He was calling for his uncle, the chief of the Blue Wolf tribe, and the man who died for the tribe, even though he was one step away from becoming the Wolf King. His uncle had made sure Locke was hidden before rushing toward the invaders. Everything will be okay. That was what his uncle had said to him. Locke started to frown after thinking about his uncle. Cale just ignored him as he turned away. Cale Nim, why is Locke like this? Choi Han still looked anxious and desperate. Originally in the novel, Choi Han had only slightly opened his heart to Locke by this point. Just what could have happened? Cale was not an idiot. He knew that Choi Han's situation had changed a bit because of him. That was why he was trying really hard to cut off their relationship. He did not ask that question, and let Choi Han continue to speak. Potions don't work either. According to Rosalind, the wolf tribe is one that cannot use potions. Healing magic does not seem to work either. I'm not sure about what to do. I need to protect him. I'm supposed to protect him. Cale was worried that it would be Choi Han who ended up going berserk if he continued like this. That would be just as scary as that dragon in the corner of the room going berserk. Maybe it was because he lived for tens of years in solitude. Actually, even though he lived for tens of years in solitude, Choi Han's personality remained one where he was a nice guy who cared a lot for things like friendship. If you trust me, just leave him to me. I trust you. Cale confirmed that Choi Han had calmed down, before turning his gaze over to Rosalind. Rosalind. She was the first successor to the throne in the Breck Kingdom. However, this genius mage was ready to throw all of that away. Rosalind reminded Cale of a red rose. She had red hair that was even brighter than Cale's, as well as beautiful red lips that currently had their corners lifted up with curiosity. Although she may remind him of a rose, her personality was closer to that of the sun. Rosalind did not put Locke, Choi Han, or even Cale in her eyes. She was focused at the corner of the room. This aura, this strong aura of mana. Rosalind was accurately looking at the chair that the dragon had used earlier, while her hands were shaking and clenched tightly. A sigh came out of Cale's mouth. It seemed like the dragon was curious about this mage. The black dragon had sent some mana over to Rosalind, and showing off some mana skills that Rosalind could not even dream about. Throughout history, dragons had a tendency to hate humans, but like mages quite a bit. The dragon was doing that because he was happy. Cale looked toward the table that seemed empty, and quietly started to speak. Stop it. Stay still. Almost instantly, Rosalind took a deep breath and quickly returned to normal. The dragon seemed to have removed his mana. Rosalind could not stop shaking as she looked toward Cale. Just what dash? Cale cut her off and pointed to Locke. This is more important. Rosalind's expression quickly calmed down. She looked at Locke, who was laying down with his eyes closed, and asked Cale. What is going on with Locke right now? Cale looked at the small staff in her hand. The reason they were able to arrive at the capital in just 3 days was probably because Rosalind used teleportation magic. Contrary to Cale's expectations, Rosalind had already revealed the extent of her abilities. You are a mage, right? Yes, I am. Have you heard anything about the berserk mode of beast tribes? Rosalind let out a small noise. However, her face quickly filled with confusion. I have read about the wolf tribe's berserk mode in books. However, I have never read anything about heating up like this and being in pain. It is because it is his first time. Cale continued to speak to the people in the room who were all looking at him. Beast people lose their sanity during their first time entering berserk mode because of the physical pain from their bodily transformation. If they can persevere past this first painful transformation, they will be able to use the berserk mode as a weapon. Beast people were at their strongest when they were in berserk mode. Cale observed Locke's situation before continuing on. He will go berserk very soon. He then turned to look at Rosalind. Rosalind nodded her head at his gaze, and sternly answered. I don't know what kind of person you are, but I am able to read the situation. Although her tone was stern, her eyes were still gentle. He is a young boy. I know. She was asking Cale for help, and Cale was agreeing to help. At that moment, the 2 kittens appeared between the 2 of them and jumped onto the bed. An and Hong were staring at Locke when. Ugh. Locke revealed his teeth and started to growl at the kittens An and Hong. His instincts were in control over his rationality right now, making him react to other beast people. He looked so vicious that even Choi Han was worried. However, smack! Hong used his front paw to smack Locke's growling mouth. It was a sharp front paw attack that seemed to be telling Locke to stop it. He then looked toward Cale with eyes that seemed to be asking Cale to hurry up and help Locke. He is fine. Cale responded to Hong when there was a knock on the door. When Cale opened the door, Hans had brought drinks, as well as wet towels. Cale gave Hans another order. Bring something to carry him with. Yeah, excuse me. Cale pointed to Locke on the bed. Put him on it and take him to the underground training arena. Oh, make sure all of the knights are out of the arena, and that nobody is in there. Hans's expression seemed to be asking why Cale would move a sick boy to the arena, but Cale just ignored it. Hurry up. Hans had a ton of questions, and was looking at Cale weirdly, but he still did his job. He quickly left to grab something to carry Locke with, while Cale turned around to look at Choi Han and Rosalind. Choi Han. And you? It's Rosalind. Yes, Rosalind. The 2 of them looked away from the bed to look at Cale. Concern, worry, despair, and sincerity. With all those emotions on their faces, Choi Han and Rosalind looked more like simple good people rather than heroes. Cale bluntly started to speak to the 2 of them. You 2 will need to get beat up a bit. Excuse me. After a few seconds of silence, Rosalind seemed shocked, while Choi Han just quietly waited for Cale's continuing words. Normally, when beast people with wild beast blood like the wolf tribe, tiger tribe, and bear tribe experience going berserk for the first time, their parents and siblings help take care of it. They take all the attacks of the berserk individual and protect them to make sure they don't get hurt. That is how they protect their children. Choi Han and Rosalind's expressions turned sour almost instantly. Locke did not have any parents or siblings now. Cale peeked over at Locke, before continuing to speak. I can tell that is not an option for this child. Clap. Cale clapped once, before pointing at Choi Han and Rosalind. That is why we will pretend that you are the mother and father, or, if you do not like that scenario, then you shall be the older brother and older sister. You two will need to figure out how to protect him. Cale had his indestructible shield, but he did not want to take care of Locke's berserk state. Why should he step in when there were people stronger than him right here? Rosalind and Choi Han looked at each other. He will tire out on his own, and the berserk state will slowly disappear. It is important that his consciousness returns during this first berserk transformation. That is the only way to make him retain his consciousness and rationality the next time he transforms into the berserk mode. That would be when his rationality beats out his natural instinct. It was important for beast people to reach that state. Choi Han debated it for a moment, before asking Cale a question. Cale Nim, how long will he maintain his berserk mode? He has the purest of pure blood. So you mean it will take a long time? Yes. Probably about 2 hours. Cale approached Locke's bed, and patted Choi Han's shoulder. It will be difficult for other people, but Choi Han, it should be easy for you. I trust you. I will succeed. I am Locke's Hyung. Rosalind looked toward Choi Han with an odd expression. Choi Han had manically killed the assassins to protect the living. During their journey, he was always alert and observing his surroundings. However, such a person seemed extremely relaxed, even though this was a very urgent situation. She then heard Cale's relaxed voice while she was still watching Choi Han. Yes, yes you are. Let's eat something delicious after it is done. Cale was thinking about the food and wine he did not get to finish. The door opened at that moment, and Hans entered with Ron and something to carry Locke. Young master, the arena has been cleared. That was fast. Cale ordered Choi Han to move the now continuously growling Locke onto the stretcher, before saying the following. One Hyung is the Korean term for an older brother, not necessarily blood-related. As stated in an earlier chapter, Nuna is the term for an older sister. However, both are true only if the younger person in this context is male. Chapter 31, U6. Cale put some stuff into a magic bag and headed to the arena. The residence's underground arena. Count Henituse's territory was famous for its wealth, but that wealth was supported by military strength. How would they be able to survive next to the forest of darkness and the dangerous monsters contained within it without a strong military strength? That was why their residences had underground training arenas that were larger and better than most duke or marquis residences. Cale gave an order as soon as they entered the large underground arena. The two of you stay out of the arena as well. Secure the area, and make sure nobody comes in from the first floor. I understand, young master. Cale had a bitter taste in his mouth at the fact that Ron had an extremely wide smile on his face, but Cale chose to let it go. After watching the two people go away, Cale carried the kittens and went to the corner of the arena. Naturally, he did not forget to motion for Choi Han and Rosalind to go very far away. The two of you head to the center. Choi Han took Locke to the center of the arena. Rosalind had a serious look on her face, as she got a bit farther away from Locke. Growl. Locke was shaking like he was having a seizure. His arms, legs, his entire body was shaking. However, neither Rosalind nor Choi Han approached him. It was because Locke was growing claws. Very sharp claws that belonged to a wild animal. Locke's body floated up in the air. It stiffened up like an arrow, before slowly starting to change. Cale verified that the large iron gate into the arena was closed tightly, before slowly heading farther into the corner with the kittens, An and Hong, also following him. This is no joke. Cale could see the tall and weak Locke slowly starting to change. Gruel, Locke now grew out some sharp fangs, before screaming in agony. He started to slowly get up and staggered a bit, before starting to frown and opening his eyes. He then looked toward the ceiling and let out a howl. Awoo. In that instant, a half-transparent barrier appeared in front of Cale. It was a shield. While An and Hong looked around in shock, Cale just casually started to speak. Dragon, you really are amazing. Can you make it soundproof as well? Another shield overlapped the existing one. Rosalind peeked over, and Cale could see her shock in seeing the 2 layers of shields in front of Cale. At that moment, the voice of the black dragon, that must be somewhere inside of this shield, filled Cale's ear. You are very weak. That is why you need protection. An and Hong were excited to realize it was the dragon, but looked at Cale with pity after hearing what the dragon had to say. They seemed to agree with the dragon's assessment. Cale ignored their gazes, and casually answered back. Do whatever you want. I do not know why you are not using that power. You don't need to know. The power. The black dragon quickly realized that Cale did not want to show that ancient power to other people, and left it vague. Cale shrugged his shoulders and, in the end, a 3rd shield was created for a total of a 3-layered shield. His skill is growing exponentially. Dragons learned magic differently than humans. Dragons controlled magic with their will. Cale thought that the black dragon's speed of improvement was surprising, but that it also made it much more useful for him. Cale could now peacefully watch Locke transforming into berserk mode down on the ground. Growl, ah. Locke's screams filled the arena. If it wasn't for the soundproof and shockproof magic that was installed around the basement, the knights of the residence would have all quickly rushed down. Locke's body became larger every time he let out a shout. Muscles that weren't there previously started to develop, and his eyes turned red. It was proof that he was losing his consciousness. Why did that little boy from the Blue Wolf tribe go berserk? In the novel, Locke would experience his first berserk transformation 1 year later. The reason for that was the death of an individual. Healer Pendrick. That elf ends up dying in battle. Pendrick was someone who reminded Locke of his dead uncle, the chief of the Blue Wolf tribe. Seeing Pendrick dying makes Locke go crazy, wanting to kill everything and everyone in sight. An, Hong. Cale looked down toward the siblings who were huddled together inside the shield. The 2 of you haven't experienced the berserk transformation yet, right? The kittens nodded their heads. Do you know anything about it? Not really. Nobody taught us about it? Cale knew this would be the case. Since An and Hong also seemed to be pure-blooded, their berserk transformation would be rough as well. Cale looked forward once again, and started to speak. The Wolf tribe, Tiger tribe, Bear tribe, and the Whale tribe, these 4 tribes lose their rationality the most during the first berserk transformation. That is why we call these 4 tribes the beast people closest to monsters. He did not know much about the Cat tribe. I do not know how the berserk transformation will be for the Cat tribe, but if you feel like you are going to go berserk or suddenly feel yourself heating up or hurting, immediately come to me. It would be bad if you caused an accident. Who would have to clean it up? Cale would have to clean up after them. Cale was someone who took full responsibility for things that happened in his territory, and the people he took in. Cale turned to look at them after not hearing any response. The 2 pairs of golden pupils of the kittens were turned toward Cale, and they both quickly headed to his leg and started to rub their faces at his leg. Why are they like this? Cale didn't like how chummy they were being, and moved his leg slightly to the side. As he did that, Cale heard something that gave him the chills. Do dragons go berserk? It would be crazy for dragons to have berserk transformations. If a dragon went berserk, multiple mountains would disappear in an instant. That was a very scary thought. Cale's expression stiffened more than ever before, as he continued to look forward. It was his way of saying he did not want to hear anything more about it. He could hear the sound of the dragon clicking its tongue in the air. While Cale was thinking about the fickleness of this dragon, Locke's berserk transformation was finally completed. Boom! The werewolf standing on 2 legs stomped on the ground, making the entire arena shake. The fur of the Blue Wolf tribe was a dark blue color. The fierce werewolf, that could no longer be called a boy, became covered in that dark blue fur. Locke swung his arm that was now covered in muscles that were incomparably larger than Choi Han's muscles, to attack with his extremely sharp claws. Locke! Locke, snap out of it! Choi Han and Rosalind tried to call out to him, but to Locke, who had lost his rationality, they were just life forms he needed to attack. Growl! A rough growl came out of Locke's mouth. This wolf, that was at least 1.5 times Choi Han's height, rushed toward him. Locke, snap out of it! It's me. Choi Han. Choi Han could not attack his companion, and thus only defended as he called out to Locke. But would that do anything to make Locke return to normal? Of course not. Cale shook his head and continued to watch. Just smacking him on the head and making him faint would be the fastest way. Gasp! The two kittens gasped and crept away from Cale. Although Cale was saying that, he had no intentions of making Choi Han do something like that. A beast person who faints like that during their first berserk transformation would lose their rationality to the transformation once again in the future. The berserk werewolf's attack was stronger than Cale expected. The fact that he was moving based on instinct made him utilize his muscles very efficiently. Cale called the kitten siblings over. There was a reason he had the two of them come with him. Watch that wolf tribe kid's movements. He wanted An and Hong to pay close attention to the werewolf Locke. Locke was relentlessly charging toward Choi Han and Rosalind. There was no retreating for Locke. That was the wolf tribe's style. Cale spoke as if he was whispering to the kittens. That is the instinctual movements of a beast person. The fact that they can move based on instinct, unlike humans, is one of the beauty and gloriousness of the beast tribes. Locke's fist smashed onto the ground and broke the marble floor. He was showing tremendous strength. You should not fear or dread going berserk. That is when beast people are at their strongest. Pat. Cale's hand patted the two kittens' heads. Although the cat tribe and wolf tribe are different, the two of you are beast people as well. Watch him to learn the style of a wild animal, the style of relying on your instincts. And then dash. The two pairs of golden pupils made eye contact with Cale. Make it your own. Either that, or think of a way to kill those bears, tigers, wolves, the ones labeled as wild beasts. The kittens, the cat tribe children, immediately turned away from Cale to observe Locke. The kittens stood up on their hind legs and observed Locke's every move. Silver and red, the two kittens' furs stood up as they became extremely nervous. Cats were weak compared to these wild beasts. It was because they were a tribe that relied on stealth that they clearly understood Cale's intent. Cale watched the kittens for a while, before calling out to the dragon. The black dragon revealed itself in the air. Rosalind and Choi Han did not have time to look toward them. They had to put their full attention on Locke. Cale pointed to the two people as he continued to speak to the dragon. Look at how Rosalind uses her magic to not hurt the opponent. Also look at how Choi Han is using his aura not to attack, but to protect himself while not harming that wolf child. Tang, tang, tang. Locke's extremely quick fists were trying to break through Rosalind's shield. Rosalind desperately called out to Locke while watching him attack. Locke, you remember me, right? I said you were part of my family now. Hurry up and snap out of it. Choi Han turned Locke's gaze over to him. He raised his murderous aura to the maximum to get Locke's attention. Locke, attack me. I am the one who will protect you. Locke responded to the murderous aura by swinging his claw toward Choi Han. Even though Locke's attack did not have any aura in it, his full physical strength was behind that attack. Cale was watching that scene from far away while continuing to speak to the dragon. It is harder to not hurt something than it is to hurt something when you have immense strength. But I know you will be able to quickly pick it up, since you are a dragon. The dragon responded to Cale. I am a dragon. There is nothing I cannot do. Correct. So watch them and make your own judgment. The dragon flew down and landed next to the kittens before turning invisible once again. Cale presumed the dragon would take in Rosalind, Choi Han, and Locke's movements like the kittens were doing. Should I have brought some wine with me? Cale lamented the fact that he had no wine, as he continued to watch this boring battle. 2 hours. For the duration of a typical movie, these three animal children kept their eyes on the battle, while Choi Han and Rosalind started to get exhausted. Huff, huff, huff. But the one who was the most exhausted was the werewolf. Huff, huff. Hyung dash dot. Choi Han reacted to the word, Hyung, and rushed toward the staggering werewolf. Although he was not completely out of the berserk mode, Choi Han's reaction made Cale stand up. No, Nuna dash dot. Locke was able to recognize Rosalind as well. Ah, Locke. Rosalind rushed over as well to hug Locke. Locke was still covered in the dark blue fur, but his eyes were starting to become focused. Locke was not hurt at all, while Rosalind and Choi Han had small injuries on their bodies. The two of them protected Locke like he was family. So, huff huff, sorry. His rationality had returned. It was a perfect first berserk mode transformation, where he was able to overcome all issues. Locke put his head on Rosalind, who was half his height, and then this 13-year-old boy started to cry. An animalistic noise was mixed in with his crying. Locke then slowly turned back into his human form, before starting to fall. The berserk mode transformation was over. Choi Han quickly approached him and prevented him from falling over. Locke was doing his best to not faint, as he was worried that he would return to his berserk state. At that moment, a man carrying two kittens arrived in front of this boy who was trying his best to keep his eyes open. Uncle. It was the man who said the same thing as his uncle. The man started to speak. You can rest now. The man smiled, and made Locke close his eyes like before. It is all over now. Locke finally relaxed and closed his eyes after hearing the man's words. Locke leaned on Choi Han and fainted. Choi Han carefully laid Locke back down on the stretcher. Cale, who had been watching this, took a potion out of the bag and threw it toward Rosalind. Rosalind caught the potion bottle and asked. Potions don't work on Locke. Cale looked at Rosalind in a way that seemed to be asking why she was saying something that was so obvious, and answered the still confused Rosalind. Why would I give a potion to someone from the wolf tribe? It's for you. You struggled quite a bit. Rosalind stared at Cale. She had seen an amazing sight of a three-layered magic, and had many things she wanted to ask Cale. However, she said something else. This had to come first. No need for thanks. Cale casually responded and turned away. He could see Choi Han, who was already looking at him. Just how did this happen? He needed to figure out what happened. We need to talk. Chapter 32, 7. Cale left the arena with Choi Han. Hans, Ron. Guide the two people still in the arena. Cale had Hans and Ron, who were waiting outside the first floor entrance, take care of Rosalind and Locke while Cale was returning to his room with Choi Han. The table which held the now cold food from earlier was between the two of them, as Cale started to speak. Tell me. The two of them got right to the point without beating around the bush. Choi Han straightened up, as he started to speak. Everything was fine until I met Rosalind. Continue. I arrived at the city Cale mentioned. Once I got there, I found the merchant guild heading for the capital as you described. Well, it was just a small brigade of 5 people rather than a guild. That small group was better described as a merchant group rather than a merchant guild. They happened to be looking for 2 mercenaries to guard them. Their usual guard was injured. Choi Han and Rosalind became the 2 mercenaries. That was how it went in the novel. That was where I met Rosalind, who looked just like you described. Breck Kingdom was across the northwest border of the Rhone Kingdom. Rosalind was originally heading from Breck Kingdom to the Magic Tower in the Whipper Kingdom, located beneath the Rhone Kingdom, when someone tries to assassinate her as she crossed into the Rhone Kingdom. She had been hiding about half of her magic skills until that point and is able to escape from the danger by using all of her skills. She thought it would be smarter to go to the capital of the Rhone Kingdom and get some information from the Information Guild rather than going straight back to the Breck Kingdom, since she did not know anything about the people who attacked her. She then causes quite the scene when she gets back to Breck Kingdom. Choi Han, who just mentioned that he had met Rosalind as a mercenary for the merchant group, continued on. She was also heading to the capital. Since we were heading to the same place, we were quite friendly with each other. Friendly? Choi Han was speaking as if he was embarrassed. I'm generally not one to talk to people if they don't talk to me, but I thought we might as well be friendly. Not really. You just have to act like your usual self. Cale had a concerned expression on his face. In the novel, Rosalind and Choi Han did not get close to each other until they met Locke. Rosalind, who became wary of people after the assassination attempt, did not reach out to be friendly with anybody. Similarly, after the incidents in Harris Village, Choi Han was not the type to approach people to become friends. Choi Han nodded his head at Cale's words, before smiling and adding on. It definitely was not something I would normally do, but I wanted to do things properly since this was my way to pay you back. Ha! Cale let out a sigh and shook his head. Choi Han seemed to have expected it, as he brushed it aside and continued to speak with a stiff expression. That group was planning on staying at the village that Cale Nim mentioned I would find Locke residing in for a few days before continuing onward on their journey. That was indeed the case. That small merchant group of 5 people was made by someone who had been helped by the Blue Wolf tribe. The injured guard was actually a warrior from the Blue Wolf tribe. The merchants deliberately chose to take the long way from Puzzle City to the capital to deliver daily necessities to the Blue Wolf tribe and receive medicinal herbs in return. Of course, it was extremely difficult, as well as a waste of even more time to go deep into the mountains to the Blue Wolf village. That was why they met at a tiny village underneath the mountains. That merchant, who was now 60 years old, had continued this partnership for the last 30 years. But something happened once we arrived at that small village. Cale became alert. The story was important from here. Right around when we arrived at the village, I learned that the guard was a beast person. I also learned that the village they were planning to meet the Blue Wolf tribe member to trade was the village that Cale Nim had mentioned as well. Cale nodded his head at Choi Han's words. He knew Choi Han would easily recognize that much. That was why I believed that I just needed to follow the tribe member that was going to show up at the village to find Locke. But that tribe member probably never showed up. But nobody showed up to make the trade. When that happened, the merchant asked us for some extra help. Cale thought about what that request would have been. Go to the Blue Wolf village with the injured Blue Wolf tribe guard. It was if we could go visit the Blue Wolf village with the injured guard. And you agreed? Yes. I agreed. Rosalind agreed as well. It followed the original story until this point. Just what could have changed? In The Birth of a Hero, Choi Han and Rosalind arrive at the Blue Wolf village with the guard warrior, only to find the village destroyed and the secret organization's assassins trying to leave. Choi Han recalls what happened to Harris village, and immediately starts to attack them. The guard warrior also goes crazy and starts to kill the assassins. He is injured even more in the process, and ends up dying. That is when Rosalind learns of Choi Han's strength. Rosalind, who had been hiding her strength and masquerading as a beginner mage, learns of Choi Han's strength and officially asks him to escort her back to Breck Kingdom. Of course, the compensation she offered him was huge. They then find Locke hiding in that destroyed village. The coward wolf boy, Locke. Until Choi Han found him, Locke had been hiding as the chief had told him. The Locke at that point is very much a coward, a weakling, and kind of slow. In simple terms, Locke easily took the position of the character that readers found to be extremely frustrating. However, his natural abilities and physical strength rise to the top 5 in the novel after his first berserk mode transformation. But why would the timing of the transformation be pulled forward by a year? I saw something I was familiar with there. What did you see? Choi Han nodded his head at Cale's question. The cold food was between the two of them, but it could probably be heated up by the nervousness that filled the air between them. Choi Han started to speak. A red star and 5 white stars. Cale's expression stiffened. He could feel his heart sink. Choi Han was saying that, instead of the assassination team, official members of the secret organization showed up at the Blue Wolf tribe. Cale could not understand why. In the novel, the Blue Wolf tribe was the target of assassination. Choi Han looked at Cale's cold expression and recalled the past for a moment. He subconsciously started to clench his fists. His fists were shaking with anger. The houses in the village deep in the mountains were simple and small. But all of them were destroyed. Most importantly, the corpses of the wolf tribe were completely black, as if they were burned to a crisp on the floor. The black corpses, what smelled like burnt flesh, and the blood that was still pouring out of their open wounds. Most of the wolf tribe members died with their eyes still open. The mountain village was already destroyed when we got there. Many of the wolf tribe members were dead as well. The Blue Wolf tribe was known for their strength, so how did the secret organization kill them? Wolves put their family, herd, and friends before themselves. Weak members who had not experienced their first berserk mode transformation. The secret organization used those weak members as hostages, before using divine items to weaken the adult wolves. After killing the adults, they then killed the young hostages. There were a few adult wolves that tried to attack them in frenzy, but the secret organization had holy water to use against those few wolves. The secret organization was a very strong organization, that even had access to divine items. They used the fact that the wolf tribe was disowned by the gods to their advantage. These cruel bastards had no issues using young children as hostages to kill their mothers, fathers, and the rest of the tribe members, while the poor young children watched in horror. The novel didn't say which of the divine items they brought. If Cale knew what the divine item was, he would be able to get one step closer to the identity of the secret organization. Unfortunately, the novel only described how the wolf tribe became weak because of the divine item. He had no way to determine the identity of the secret organization. Cale slowly asked. Were they all dead? Choi Han shook his head. Cale's expression stiffened again. Choi Han observed Cale's stiff expression, as he continued. They were trying to capture the young children. Capture? Originally, they killed them all. Why would they want the young wolf tribe children? Cale's mind started to become complicated. Choi Han made eye contact with the Cale, who was thinking deeply. The chief was dying when we arrived at the entrance of the Blue Wolf tribe's village. There were less than 100 members of the Blue Wolf tribe. And they were trying to take 10 children with them. This is becoming too different from the novel. And the moment the chief was about to fall, a young boy got in the way of the people trying to take the children. Locke. Yes. It was Locke. Why would Locke show up this time? In the novel, he had stayed hidden, even when the children were killed. Did he think killing and kidnapping were different? Was it his instinctual need to protect his family members and his younger siblings, who were weaker than him? What would have made Locke's natural wolf instincts flare up? I stopped the assassin. No, I tried to kill them. Choi Han said that as he looked back at Cale. Cale did not show any emotions as he urged Choi Han to continue speaking. Keep going. I realized that the people who did not have stars on their clothes used the same black power as the assassins I killed at Harris village. Cale asked back with a shocked expression. It was the same power as the people who destroyed Harris village. This. Cale grabbed his head with one hand and let out a sigh. He was acting like it was his first time hearing about this. Of course, all of this was just an act. Among them, there was just one person who had the red star with 5 white stars on their chest. That person was the one who killed the guard. Choi Han started to tear up. And that trash of a human was drinking the wolf tribe's blood. Cale closed his eyes. The blood-drinking mage. He was the crazy lunatic who would lead the terror incident at the capital. He kept his eyes closed as he heard the rest of Choi Han's report. In the end, I could not capture or kill them. The ones I captured committed suicide, while the rest disappeared when the person with the stars used teleportation magic. Why would the blood-drinking mage, who is a highest-tier mage and crazy for blood, try to kidnap the Blue Wolf tribe children instead of killing all of them like in the novel? Did something change drastically because I saved the dragon? The only thing Cale could think about was the changes he has made so far to the original story. This is what the mage said. Choi Han continued in an angry and bitter voice. How disappointing. They were perfect as seeds. These young ones probably have even tastier blood. Seed. Cale didn't know what the mage meant by seed, but he kept the word on the back of his mind as he opened his eyes and asked. And the children? The guard, chief, and the rest of the wolf tribe adults were dead. The only ones left were the 10 children and Locke. Choi Han avoided Cale's gaze. This was the first time he did that since they sat down at this table. Cale instantly figured out what must have happened, as Choi Han reported in a quiet voice. They are at the inn. Choi Han opened and closed his mouth a few more times before finally adding on. We came together with Rosalind's magic. It's going to be a real problem. Cale could feel a headache brewing. Choi Han should have just left the children with that merchant that they were traveling with. Although that merchant was far away from power right now, he was a great merchant. Cale knew. That merchant is also at the inn. Is this how the story will go? That was what Cale was thinking right now. Cale observed Choi Han, who seemed to be finished with his report, and leaned back on the chair to sigh. Seeing Choi Han like that, Cale asked a question. You must be curious. Choi Han looked toward the cold food and answered. Yes. I am curious. He did not even need to say what he was curious about. Who they were. Why they were doing such terrible things. And why Cale knew about them. Choi Han was curious about all of those things. Cale observed Choi Han's pupils, that were looking down at the cold food on the table, and started to think. This punk is really angry right now. The anger was not directed toward Cale. Choi Han was sharpening his anger toward the secret organization over and over again, like a sharp blade. Harris Village, the tortured dragon, and the incident with the Blue Wolf tribe. Choi Han's personally was one where he would clash with them instead of avoiding them. Cale picked up a cold, but still delicious bread, and ripped off a piece to put into his mouth. I plan on telling you 2 things. But not everything. Correct. Cale did not care that Choi Han was staring at him. He stood up with the bread still in his hand. The chair was pushed back without making a noise on the carpet. Stand up. Are we going somewhere? Cale checked his watch after watching Choi Han get up after him. It was long past evening and heading toward night. That place was one to shine even brighter as the night got deeper. Cale walked toward the door and responded to Choi Han's question. The Temple of the God of Death. Cale was planning on going with Choi Han to the brightest place at night, the Temple of the God of Death. There was a special type of priest at the temples of the God of Death that could not be found anywhere else on the continent. The deaf official. They could not hear anything you said to each other. That was why the believers of the God of Death looked for them. Although Cale was not a believer, he was planning on visiting them, like most nobles. Cale turned around once he got to the door. Choi Han was still standing by the table. Cale started to smile. I plan on telling you 2 truths. Although he was smiling, The next thing out of his mouth was not light at all. "With my life on the line." Choi Han's pupils lightly shook. However, Cale still had a smile on his face as he turned back around. Choi Han slowly moved away from the table and headed toward the door. His eyes had calmed back down, but his face was still stiff. Cale was turning the doorknob as he repeated himself once again. "I will tell you the truth with my life on the line." Cale headed toward the temple of the god of death with Choi Han. Chapter 33, U8. Nobody seemed to find it odd that Cale suddenly wanted to head out. Ron seemed to have gone somewhere as well, as he was nowhere to be found. The only question Hans had for Cale was about where Cale was going. "Young master, where are you going?" "Don't worry about it." "Yes, sir. But since this is your first day in the capital, can you please return without breaking any alcohol bottles today? Are you really going to keep getting out of line like this?" "Not at all. Please be safe, young master." Cale got on the carriage and started to think about how to deal with Hans, who kept stepping out of line. The carriage arrived at the temple while he was thinking. "Let's get off." Cale got up to step out of the carriage. Choi Han had been quiet ever since they got on the carriage, no, since they stepped out of Cale's room. He seemed to have a lot of complicated emotions storming through his head right now. Cale only knew about Choi Han's personality until the 5th volume of The Birth of a Hero. However, there was one thing that Cale was sure about. Although Choi Han was a good person, he was not gullible. He was very smart. If I tried to give an unbelievable excuse, he may believe me at first, but will definitely doubt me later. Choi Han may have been very lonely after living in solitude for tens of years, but that experience taught him how to survive on his own, and how to stubbornly persevere. Choi Han may look at him favorably right now and follow him, but, as seen around Volume 5 of The Birth of a Hero, he is someone who eventually wishes to be the leader. Choi Han is someone who will live to make his personal view of justice a reality. It is too white. The temple of the god of death that Cale saw once he alighted was completely white, without a speck of dirt to be seen. The believers of the god of death considered white to be the color of death, and cleaned everything over and over again every single day to make sure there was not a speck of dust anywhere on the building. What an interesting place. The temple of the god of death looked like it wanted to show that people had nothing to fear about the night with their actions. They opened the temple to both believers and non-believers once the sun started to set. Apparently, the priests are all sleeping if you come during the day. It really was an interesting place in Cale's opinion. They were greeted by 2 priests at the temple entrance. "May you be blessed with a peaceful rest." The priests of the god of death were generally extremely bubbly. Although people may consider death to be the end, the philosophy of the Church of the God of Death believed that it was important to enjoy life as they headed toward the peaceful rest. "Priest Nim." Cale slowly approached the priest. The priest inspected Cale with a curious expression. Cale looked like he was either an extremely affluent noble or a wealthy merchant based on his outfit. But the man behind him looked like a beggar, although the sword on his waist made him look somewhat strong. "Is there an open room of death?" The 2 priests' expressions stiffened. The priest who asked the question looked back and forth between Cale and Choi Han before asking, "Whose death will you be putting on the line?" The priest peeked toward Choi Han as he said that. Choi Han currently looked like he had been rolling on a mountain and been suffering for a while. He also looked like he had not eaten anything for about 2 days, and seemed to be the type that would be easily scammed. The priest had a bitter feeling about this. The priest turned his gaze over to the affluent noble. Beautiful red hair and a handsome face. He was not very handsome, but it was enough to catch attention wherever he went. In addition, this man was currently smiling. Cale smiled as he slightly raised his hand. "Mine." Cale smiled once more at the confused priest. "I will be putting my life on the line." Choi Han put his hand on Cale's shoulder at that time. Cale turned around to see Choi Han with a stiff, yet anxious expression. I will believe you even if you don't do this. Cale started to smirk and slowly responded. I don't think you will. Choi Han will have no choice but to not believe him. How could he believe Cale when Cale was not planning to tell him anything? That was why they were at the temple. Why would I tell him everything? That'll just make me get involved in the mess. There was no reason for him to get involved with Choi Han that much. Cale wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life if Choi Han was around. It's already visible. Didn't Choi Han bring him more trouble to him by bringing all of the wolf children? He rides on the whales with the whale tribe to fight against mermaids in the future. In this human-centric world, Choi Han's position to embrace both humans and non-humans makes him start to change. The start of that is the whale tribe. The whale tribe that appeared at the beginning of Volume 5 was, to be honest, quite scary. They were the deadliest predators. The whale tribe was the strongest of the beast people. They were also the most beautiful beast people. The whale tribe had different colors of black, gray, or pink, but they were all extremely beautiful. In comparison, the mermaids of this world had 2 legs and fins, looking like a human covered in scales. But they are so stubborn that they won't even be humble in front of a dragon. The whale tribe was extremely scary. Although they were small in number, their casual punch could easily blow up a human's head. Even Locke could not lift a finger to the whale tribe. Their temper is ruthless. Choi Han gets involved with all sorts of people and trouble as well. Cale had no desire to continue being involved with him. Priest Nim. The room. Yes, we have one. I will prepare it for you right away. Please head to the basement. Cale started to walk behind the priest. Choi Han followed behind Cale with an iffy expression. Cale noticed Choi Han's movement, and leisurely walked toward the innermost area of the temple. After walking for a long time, they could see numerous doors on one side of the wall. The priest opened one of those doors to reveal a staircase leading down into the basement. Death awaits you at the bottom. Great. Let's go. The priest watched Cale walking down the stairs without any hesitation with interest. The death that is mentioned in the Temple of Death also meant vow. Death was something that was guaranteed to visit you at some point. It was not something you could avoid, and your responsibility was to accept your role in the world while you are here. That was why the officials of the Temple of the God of Death brought the end known as death for those who go against their vow. Because of this, people who headed to this room of death, or sometimes called the room of vows, tended to be humble and serious. In contrast, this relaxed and confident person was really unique in the priest's eyes. It makes me think about Priestess Cage. She was someone who cursed the temple extremely frequently, but she was still loved by the Lord. Cage. The priest suddenly thought about her, but quickly erased it from her thoughts. At the same time, Cage was becoming frustrated while hearing the Lord's voice again. After getting rid of the thoughts about Cage, the priest headed down the stairs behind Cale. Once they got to the bottom, the priest opened the door and informed Cale and Choi Han. Please wait a moment. I will get it ready. The priest then entered into the room alone. Cale looked toward the closed door and started to speak. If you really don't think we need to do this, I will let you know one of the truths in advance. What do you think? Choi Han immediately responded. Yes, please tell me. I trust you. Cale rubbed his chin with one hand before casually spitting the truth out. The first of the 2 truths. His gaze turned toward Choi Han. I do not know the secret organization's identity nor their goal. What the dash? Choi Han's pupils started to shake. At that moment, they heard a click and the priest came back out of the room. You can enter now. The person putting their life on the line just needs to raise their hand once inside the room for the priest Nim. Thank you. We understand. Compared to the relaxed Cale, Choi Han seemed extremely confused and anxious. The priest tilted his head in confusion at this, but quietly left the area. It was none of his business. Cale grabbed the doorknob as he turned to look back at Choi Han. Hard to believe. That, you see. Cale could see Choi Han struggling to answer. Choi Han had said he trusted Cale, but he could not trust Cale's words. How could Cale not know? Did that make any sense? Choi Han then heard Cale's voice in his ear. Choi Han looked toward Cale. Cale's relaxed expression made him seem very mature. Cale then started to speak. Let's go in. Choi Han followed Cale into the room of death that was behind the white door. As expected, the room was completely white, with a white table, white chair, and white walls. The only non-white thing in the room was the priest who was standing there with his mouth and ears covered. The deaf priest. Cale did not really look favorably upon that title, but these priests were pretty well respected in this world. Nobles and royalty, anybody who needed to have a secret conversation or stealthily sign a contract came to see these priests. Cale silently bowed his head to greet the priest before raising his hand. The priest nodded at Cale's action and pointed to the two chairs by the table. Cale sat down on the right side while Choi Han sat across from him on the left. The priest moved to the head of the table before pushing a piece of paper toward them. For the person who is putting their life on the line. The hand of the god of death will touch the one who came with you. Once that happens, you can say your vow. Should you break your vow, death awaits you. What a vicious set of directions. Cale pushed the paper back to the priest after verifying that Choi Han had finished reading. The priest then lifted both of his hands up like Cage had done before. At that moment, the white room started to shake. Maybe it was because this was a place that served the Lord, but a black smoke started to form around the priest once the room started to shake. The black smoke then surrounded both Choi Han and Cale before creating a connection between the two of them. Is this the power of the god of death? Cale responded to Choi Han's question before trying to feel the black smoke thread surrounding him. It happened when Cage made the vow as well, but the power of the god of death reminded him of the stakes of this vow. I will die if I break this vow. Cale was sure Choi Han felt it as well. That must be why his face stiffened up. Cale could feel the touch of the god of death and started his vow. The priest in front of me guarantees that he cannot hear, and, if that is not the truth, he will pay the price with his life. This was the general phrase stated first whenever a vow was made with a deaf priest. Furthermore, I, Cale Henituse, vow to speak the truth to Choi Han in front of the god of eternal rest, and, if what I say is even slightly a lie, I will immediately die in this spot to pay the price. Immediately. That word made Choi Han's face stiffen up even more. He was nervous. At first, Cale debated whether to tell Choi Han everything. I was transported into the novel I was reading. I am also Korean. That is why I know what happens until Volume 5. This secret organization goes on to cause issues throughout the continent. The continent soon falls into a state of chaos because of a war. Should Cale say all of that? Or, should he say something like this? I was transported into the novel I was reading and ended up as the son of a wealthy noble. That was why I was trying to just live a peaceful life, but I remembered what happened in the novel so I changed it around a bit. I wanted to allow myself to live peacefully, even if the continent was in a state of war. Cale didn't like either of them. The first one might get him involved in the continent's war and make him die out on the battlefield, while the second one might lead to Choi Han's contempt killing him. Cale did not want either of those to happen. First of the two truths. I, Cale Henituse, do not know the identity of that organization. Sigh. Choi Han let out a deep sigh before covering his face with both hands. He slowly moved his hands away after a bit to see that Cale was still alive. I am being honest when I say that I do not know their identity. It was the truth. Cale, the original Kim Rok-soo, had read The Birth of a Hero until Volume 5, but it did not mention anything about the secret organization's goals or identity. All it discussed was the actions of the organization. And one more thing. I am being completely honest when I say this. The second of the two truths. I despise the organization and wish for it to disappear. Naturally, Cale was still alive. He did not like these people that caused such incidents. They probably take part in the continent's war as well. Cale wished for them to disappear so that he could live calmly on a peaceful continent. Choi Han seemed like he was at a loss for words. He looked at the black thread connecting himself, the priest, and Cale, before repeatedly clenching and unclenching his fist. Cale flinched at Choi Han's scary expression when Choi Han started to speak. How can you hate them if you don't know them? Because I know about a couple of the terrible things they plan on doing. The Black Dragon and Locke are two of them. Choi Han. Cale pointed to himself with his index finger. I have lived my life as trash. That is my dream. Choi Han's expression changed after hearing Cale say that his dream was to be trash. I have no desire to become my family's successor. Cale Henituse, my blood-related younger brother. I am hoping for him to become the successor. This was also the truth. That was why Cale asked Choi Han a question. So then why would I have come to the capital as the representative of the Henituse family? Especially when I am hoping Basin becomes the successor. My father, the head of the household, told me to go, but I could have said no. Choi Han answered after a duration of silence. I am not sure. It is because I know what the secret organization is planning to do in the capital. Choi Han's pupils dilated once more. I cannot answer how I know. But they are planning to kill a lot of people at the capital. I couldn't send Basin to such a place. I want to prevent that incident from happening. Of course, Cale was not planning to do anything and everything to put his own life on the line for others. After taking care of all of these issues as quietly as possible, I plan on returning to the Henituse territory. You cannot tell me how you know. Correct. I cannot tell anybody, no matter who it is, about it. Choi Han's eyes were full of questions, but his mouth stayed shut. Cale didn't know the identity of the secret organization, but he knew about a couple things they would end up doing. He also despised them and wanted them gone. Choi Han's head fell even more as he started to think things over. His head was a mess right now. Even still, the power of the god of death coming through the black thread gave him serenity. He knew that Cale would die right here if he had lied. However, I will tell you one more thing. One more. That made Choi Han quickly lift his head to look at Cale. The last truth. This was the third truth Cale told Choi Han. I have no desire to harm you. Cale was confident as he said that. He remained alive, which meant this was the truth. Choi Han started to frown. Choi Han started to tap his thigh with his clenched fist. Although he was not tapping very hard, veins were popping out of his tightly clenched fist. He slowly raised his head. Cale was still alive. Listening to that response that took so long to come out, Cale repeated the words he had said to Choi Han before they entered this room. He then started to smile. Choi Han sighed while still sitting at the table. He lifted his head to look at Cale. Cale's eyes were pure as usual, while stubborn. Cale Nim. Please promise one more thing. Then I will completely trust you. I didn't think something like this would happen. Cale was feeling iffy about Choi Han's response. It shouldn't be a big deal because he would be able to find a way to twist anything to suit himself, but it was the phrase, completely trust you, that was not sitting well with Cale. But it wasn't like he could say no right now. Sure. What is it? I must get revenge on that organization. I think this is the first time in my life I've ever hated a person or an organization so much. Anger filled Choi Han's pure eyes. A sense of nostalgia could be seen behind the anger as well. Choi Han was probably thinking about Harris Village. Cale held back from letting that noise escape from his mouth. This was why he did not want Choi Han with him, even if Choi Han chose to follow him. Choi Han was a good person, but he would always finish something he made up his mind to do. That was why Cale waited for Choi Han's final request with nervousness. Choi Han finally started to speak. Please tell me, no matter what, if you find out their identity. Well, sure. I thought he was going to ask something difficult. Cale had a shocked expression as he made the vow. I, Cale Henituse, will inform Choi Han once I learn of their identity. I will pay with my life should I go against this vow. Good enough. Yes, thank you very much. Choi Han finally started to smile. He seemed to be relieved. Cale started to think while observing this Choi Han. How would I ever learn of their identity? In order to find out their identity, actually, in order to even find the smallest clue about their identity, he would need to go down the same route Choi Han took in the novel. He would have to be crazy to do that. Once Choi Han gets out of the capital and the Roan kingdom, he would run into all sorts of heroes, humans and non-humans alike. Just thinking about it made Cale feel terrible. Then are we done? Cale lifted his hand and slammed down on the table. His smash made the table slightly shake, and the priest opened his eyes and nodded his head. The area vibrated once more. Boom! With that, the smoke disappeared into each of their bodies. It was slightly different from when Cale had experienced this with the crazy priestess cage. Cale felt the two vows becoming ingrained into his body as he took a piece of paper out of his pocket. It was the check for 10 million gallons. Cale put that money in front of the calmly seated priest and got up. He then said goodbye to the priest before heading out of the room. Choi Han looked back and forth between the money and Cale, before following Cale out of the room and closing the door. He then looked toward Cale with confusion. Cale casually responded to Choi Han's gaze. Nothing in life is free. Cale walked back up the stairs to find the priest from earlier standing at the entrance on the first floor. The priest greeted the still alive Cale. May your life continue until its destined time. It was their way of telling you not to break your vow so that you could continue to live. It was completely merciless. Thank you very much, Priest Nim. Cale thanked the priest with a smile in response. The priest still found Cale's smile and relaxed voice to be odd, but Cale just walked past him to leave the temple. He then got on the carriage and started to speak once the carriage started to move. For your reference, that crazy mage, that person is the leader of the incident that will happen at the capital. Am I allowed to kill them if I see them? Why are you asking me such an obvious question? Do as you want. Doesn't matter to me. However, that crazy mage was a highest level mage and a teleportation specialist, so Choi Han was never able to do what he wished in the novel. Yes. I will make sure to kill them. Cale turned away from the angry face of Choi Han. It was too vicious for Cale to handle. Once they got back to their residence, there was another individual Cale found difficult to handle. The assassin Ron, who had a benign smile on his face, came to look for Cale, who was trying to rest in his chamber. Chapter 34, Being Still, 1. Cale blankly stared at the teacup that Ron was offering him. Lemon tea before bed. Cale was not used to drinking lemon tea before bed. He didn't feel like drinking it, but he lifted the teacup up without saying anything else. He felt Ron's gaze on him as he took a sip of the lemon tea. It was then that Ron started to speak. Young master, may I make a request? Kek, what? A request. Cale's eyes opened wide at Ron saying the word, request, and turned to look at Ron quickly. Ron still had a gentle smile on his face. Cale's eyes started to fog up, as he quickly started to think. This devious old man has a request for someone like me, who he thinks is useless. Cale had an indescribable sense of ominousness. He felt like the man who tried to get rid of a lump on his face and ended up coming back with two. Either that, or the woodcutter who was greedy and claimed that both the golden axe and the silver axe were his and ended up leaving empty-handed without even his own axe. Cale calmed himself before asking in a relaxed manner. "All right, what is it?" Ron immediately shared his request with Cale. "May I have 2 days off?" Cale subconsciously let out a gasp. He felt like he had his lump removed and received the set of golden and silver axes as a gift at the same time. Cale put the teacup down and grabbed Ron's hand, before starting to rapidly speak, unlike his usual style. "Yes. Good idea. Ron, you've worked so hard for tens of years. You had to take care of this trash of a young master. If you want a break, you can take off as long as you want. You are more than welcome to do that." Yes, Cale would like it if Ron took a very long break. However, Ron needed to return before the Capital Terror incident in order to get connected to Choi Han, so 2 days was perfect. Cale was looking forward to enjoying the next 2 days without looking at this assassin's face. Ron looked toward Cale, who was holding his hand vigorously, with curiosity. However, Cale quickly turned his gaze away from Ron and opened a dresser next to the bed. Cale removed a money pouch out of the dresser and held it up. Checks and large amounts of money were in the residence's safe, but there was still a lot of money in this bag as well. Cale took the whole bag and put it in Ron's hand. He was the son of a wealthy family and really did not have anything else to give other than money. "Here. This isn't much, but buy yourself some delicious food and enjoy your break." Ron just blankly stared at the money pouch Cale had put in his hand. "Buy myself delicious food and enjoy my break." This made Ron think about how long he had been living in hiding. He had spent that whole time taking care of this trash, this puppy young master. He was now trying to step back out of hiding and restart his life. But there was a good chance that his future would be chaotic. If those people really had crossed over to the Western continent, it would actually be worse than just chaotic. Then I should leave my son here. Ron looked toward the relaxed young master in front of him. "Young master, will it really be okay?" Cale excitedly answered Ron's question. He wanted Ron to enjoy himself so much that he would desire to leave Cale for good. "Of course. Ron, you are qualified to enjoy a break." Qualification. Ron's original plan was to quietly leave in a few days either alone, or with B. Crocs. However, this damn affection was the problem. That was why he mentioned a 2-day break. He wanted to see what this little punk would say. He was curious to know. This puppy young master of his now knew what kind of person he was because of Choi Han. Ron still had a gentle expression on his face, but his gaze started to turn cold. "Young master, this is too much money. What will you do if I take this and run away? Or is it that you want me to run away since you heard that I am a strong individual?" Although the years of forcing himself to smile had created a lot of wrinkles on his face, his sharp gaze was directed to Cale. Ron could see Cale's reaction. Cale had snorted. "You think I don't know your personality, Ron? If you were going to run, you would have either left without saying anything or just flat out said that you were leaving. Am I wrong?" That was how Ron had left in the novel. He didn't say anything to the Count, and whenever he needed to separate from Choi Han's party for a bit, he would discuss their contract before leaving. "You are right. That is indeed correct." Ron nodded his head with a smile on his face. Now that he thought about it, this puppy young master in front of him had seen him more than his own son, B. Crocs, had for the last tens of years. In fact, Cale might be the person who knows the current Ron the best. "I am very old now too." The old man accepted that he was getting older. Just like how tree rings don't grow all at once, the effects of time did not avoid him as well. He then started to speak. "I will be back to serve you when you head to the royal palace. If you really want to." Ron looked toward the uninterested Cale and put the money pouch away. He couldn't allow Cale to go into the palace looking worse than the royal family or the other nobles. Ron did not want to see the puppy young master that he raised being looked down upon by others. That would be his last duty before he left. "Then I will head out now." "Sure, Sure. Cale waved Ron out while sitting on his bed and had a wonderful night of sleep for the first time in a long time. By the time Cale woke up around lunchtime the next day, Ron had already left early in the morning on his break. Thanks to that, Deputy Butler Hans became responsible for serving Cale. Mr. Ron said he wasn't comfortable unless it was me. Haha, I guess I am kind of amazing. Can you just be quiet? Cale ignored Hans and looked outside the open chamber door. Choi Han had been standing outside the door since early this morning. Cale was staring at Choi Han while wondering what was going on, and Choi Han answered without even needing to be asked. Mr. Ron asked me to protect you. What was Ron thinking? Cale had a serious expression on his face as he received a cup from Hans. He then started to frown. Hans. Why did you bring me lemonade? Excuse me? Young master, don't you like lemonade? Sigh. Cale let out a deep sigh and drank the lemonade. It was better than cold water to wake him up and settle his stomach. Choi Han watched Hans and Cale from outside the chamber door as he recalled his conversation with Ron the night before. You're going somewhere? Yes. Where? Nothing a kid like you needs to know about. Did you come to talk to me for Cale Nim? You figure it out. That was what Ron said before leaving early this morning. Choi Han saw the assassin Ron instead of the servant Ron when Ron walked out of the residence. Choi Han snapped out of it as Cale called out to him. Cale had gotten up from the bed and was heading to the bathroom. Cale asked Choi Han, who was looking at him. Is Locke awake? Yes sir. The wolf tribe really did have fast regenerative abilities. Cale looked at the time. The piggy bank Billows, the bastard son of the Flynn Merchant Guild's leader, would soon arrive at the capital. Cale had promised to drink with him, and had already decided where they would meet. It was the same inn he had told Choi Han to stay in once he got to the capital. That inn also had a bar, which was famous for its alcohol. And something that will connect Choi Han and Billows is there. Cale thought about the merchant who would be with the 10 wolf children right now and asked. What about the children and the merchant at the inn? I was thinking you could stop by on your way back from the meeting. Meeting? Hans approached the confused Cale and started to speak. Young master, the invitation from the northeastern nobles. Cale had forgotten about that because he did not consider those nobles to be very important. He started to frown a bit as he debated what to do. What kind of trash actions would he need to do at the meeting? Cale, Kim Rok-soo, had never met these people before, but it didn't matter. He was known as trash for a reason. And the guest wishes to speak with you as well. Are you talking about Miss Rosalind? Yes. She said any time will work based on your schedule. Rosalind was a smart girl. She probably already suspects that the feeling of mana from yesterday is from a dragon. She has probably never seen a dragon before, but such powerful mana could not come from anything other than a dragon. Cale opened the door to the bathroom and gave an order to Hans as he went in. I will eat breakfast in my room, so get it ready. After that, ask Miss Rosalind if she would like to have breakfast together. Yes, young master. I understand. However, it is the middle of the day, so it would be lunch. Hans. I will get it ready right away. Cale glared at Hans, who vigorously answered, and gave one last command before closing the bathroom door. And leave the terrace door open. The black dragon needs to be able to come in. It was very odd that it could only sleep well if it slept outside on a tree by the window. Then I will go bring Rosalind over now. Cale sat on a chair by the food, that was breakfast for some and lunch for others, and sent Hans out. B. Croc seemed to have put in quite the effort, as the food on the table looked fabulous. The table was full of food, probably because he asked for it all at once instead of in courses. Choi Han approached him. I will go stay with Locke while you are eating. I guess the two of you are taking turns nursing him. Choi Han started to smile in embarrassment at Cale's proclamation. Although Locke was quickly recovering, he was still laying on the bed with Rosalind and Choi Han taking turns nursing him. Of course, Rosalind was doing the majority of the nursing. An and Hong are helping to take care of him as well. Like hell they are. Choi Han could only remain silent at Cale's words. An and Hong were staying in Locke's room. But this was what the two kittens told Cale in secret before heading over. I think we are too weak to kill a wolf tribe. We will probably lose, even if we enter berserk mode. We need to figure out a way to squash people like him. Right, we need to figure out a way. That is why we will go study a bit. An and Hong were not there to nurse Locke but to determine how to kill such enemies in the future. But Locke still seems relaxed having two cute kittens with him. I guess that's great. Cale had no desire to tell Choi Han and Locke the truth. Choi Han inspected the area to verify that the black dragon was not in the room before quietly speaking. I did not tell Locke or Rosalind that I brought them with me because you told me to do so. I told you I would keep it a secret. Choi Han was showing a reliable side to Cale. Maybe it was because of yesterday's vow, but Choi Han did not know how devious words could be. He didn't know how words could be used to favor one party more than the other. The god of death would only follow Cale's words and his interpretation of it because he was the one to put his life on the line. That is why nobles spent at least a week preparing what to say when they are going to make a vow of death. They usually average at least 10 pages of texts to say. Cale thought about how he would use Choi Han in the future before starting to speak to Choi Han, who seemed to really trust him. Choi Han, did you say you were going to kill that blood-drinking mage if you saw them again? Cale nodded his head at the answer that came without any hesitation and continued to speak. I will tell you how to find that person. Choi Han's gaze started to change. But Cale was not done just yet. Of course, we have to prevent the terror incident first. Choi Han's expression seemed to be asking Cale to tell him right away, but the moment he opened his mouth, there was a knock on the door followed by Hans's voice. Young master, I have brought Rosalind Nim. Cale nodded at Choi Han and got up from the chair. Choi Han silently got up as well and opened the door. Hans and Rosalind entered through the open door. Hans did not enter any farther than the door frame and calmly added on to what he stated previously. Young master, Rosalind Nim, please let me know if you need anything. Hans then bowed and stepped out of the room. Choi Han followed behind him. Rosalind, I will be with Locke. Okay. Once the two of them left, only Rosalind and Cale were left in the room. Rosalind looked to be calm, yet cold. Thank you for the invitation, young Master Cale. It was nothing, Miss Rosalind. Cale pointed to the chair across from him and started to speak. There are a lot of things we need to discuss. Young Master, I guess you don't like to beat around the bush. Rosalind started to smile as she asked, and Cale looked toward the open terrace window and started to speak. In that instant, Rosalind quickly turned around. She could see some leaves floating into the room. She could not help but tremble. However, she was able to logically think things through last night. She had thought about it all night while nursing Locke. 3-layered magic and the ability to do such a thing. There was really just one answer. She moved her gaze from the leaves floating their way and looked toward Cale and asked. Dragon. Is it a dragon Nim? Mages really did respect dragons. Her demeanor clearly showed that was the case. Cale started to smirk, as he started to speak toward the floating leaves. You introduce yourself. In that instant, the leaves that were floating on top of the table, or over the stakes if you want to be really specific, turned into a black dragon. It had removed its invisibility magic. Rosalind could not even gasp, as she was completely shocked. Even though she knew it was going to be a dragon, it still was shocking. There were less than 20 dragons in existence in both the western and eastern continents combined, but such an existence was in front of her right now. They were known for never leaving their territory and lair, and enjoying life as the most amazing existence in the world. Furthermore, dragons were the king of both mana and nature. They were also an existence that preferred solitude. Although it was confirmed that there were 20 dragons in the world, they were all different colors and varied drastically in personality, habits, and traits. The Magic Tower found this to be quite interesting. Why were they different in color and personality, even after growing up under their parents? There was only one explanation they could fathom. Dragons are prideful creatures that want to be different from any other. They want to be unique while they are alive. That was the case, even amongst their own tribe of dragons. Such an existence was in front of Rosalind's eyes right now. It was a young dragon, but the mana she could feel and the unique gaze of a dragon told her it really was just like any other dragon. The black dragon quietly observed Rosalind for a bit before turning its head away. Rosalind did not know what to say about the dragon's action. After doing that, the dragon moved in front of the stake and started to speak. "I am hungry. Go ahead, you can eat it." Cale shook his head as he answered, and also offered Rosalind a seat. "We should eat as well." "Ah, yes." Rosalind had a blank expression on her face as she sat down. She could see the young black dragon eating the steak in front of her, while Cale, who was dressed fancier than usual because he needed to attend the Northeastern Nobles meeting, was elegantly eating a soup. Nobody at the Magic Tower would believe her if she told them about this. However, Rosalind believed in what she was seeing in front of her eyes, as well as the rest of her 5 senses. Everything in nature could be felt by the 5 senses. It is so amazing that a mage like myself can see such a sight. A dragon is with a human. Rosalind believed in the sight in front of her and revealed her honest observation. Cale did not care to respond, but the black dragon stopped eating the steak to look at Rosalind. He then turned his head to look at Cale. It was the face of a reptile, but its expression was clearly visible. The black dragon started to frown while looking at Cale, who was still eating his soup, and started to speak. "Very weak. He is no better than an ant. That is the reason." Both Cale and the dragon agreed. Rosalind watched this with curiosity, before eventually nodding her head. "A meal with young Master Cale and Dragon Nim. It is an honor." Rosalind was calm as she elegantly lifted up her fork. Cale observed her expression, as he continued to eat his soup. "She really is a courageous person. Any other mage would be shaking non-stop and praising the dragon right now. They would then ask the dragon to teach them even a little bit about mana or magic. A dragon's magic was something that would make any mage on the continent go crazy." Cale started to speak to Rosalind, who was starting off with a salad. "Please feel free to stay here as long as you like. I have 3 things I am curious about. But one of them has already been resolved, so I have 2 more. May I ask about them?" "Please do." The first was probably about the dragon. Cale had decided to reveal the dragon's existence to Rosalind after contemplating it for a long time. He felt like it would be more beneficial to him that way. He felt like he could anticipate the other 2 questions as well. "Here is the second thing I am curious about." Rosalind asked her question calmly and sincerely. "Is it okay to allow someone who was not invited to stay in your residence like this? Even if I am a mage, as a noble, you must be sensitive about associating with strangers." Cale easily answered that question. "It is fine because you are someone Choi Han brought." Cale peeked at the black dragon, that was eating the steak, before looking back toward Rosalind and continuing to speak. "I also have this guy." The black dragon did not respond to that statement. However, he flicked his wing once before stuffing his face into the steak plate and starting to devour the steak even faster than before. Rosalind watched the dragon for a long time before her red pupils moved back to Cale, who was eating a salmon steak. "I see. Then here is my third question." Cale stopped eating the salmon steak and looked up at Rosalind. Their eyes met, and Cale could see her red pupils. Originally, Rosalind changed her pupils from red to black with magic when they entered the capital. She did the same thing with her hair color. However, that was not the case right now. Rosalind asked her question. Why do you speak so respectfully to me, despite your status as a noble? Cale lifted up the wine glass next to the salmon steak and took a sip of the white wine. He then started to speak. Red hair, red pupils, and a mage. Then there is your self-revealed name of Rosalind. It was weird to pretend not to know when someone was being so clear about it. Cale started to smile as he asked. Princess Nim, aren't you the one who should stop speaking so respectfully to me? 1 Korean folk tale. 2 Another Korean folk tale. Part 5 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.